Thank you very much indeed, Phil, for giving us that very important scene setting, particularly around the two targeted rates, and I'll come back to them. And I'm sure you'll have a very pleasant dinner with a certain retired gentleman who plays some golf, but not the former Prime Minister, although he'll be there too. Anyway, a little bit more housekeeping. Tonight, I'll be introducing you to our panelists, and I'll be welcoming them up shortly, and they have very extensive backgrounds across varied environmental areas. So we will have a discussion with our panelists on some key environmental topics and the targeted rates, and then we'll open up that discussion to you from the floor. Now, there's going to be two ways for you to contribute. The first one is the high-tech version, which is slido.com. So if you have a smartphone, if you go to Slido, slido.com, and put in the event code, #environment, and I think it's going to be case sensitive, so you'll probably need that capital E, in my experience of Slido. You can submit questions that way. I'll be seeing, and indeed the panelists will be seeing those questions coming up here. They'll be very lightly moderated. They'll be ranked, so you'll have a chance to, on Slido, to see the ones which are heading up the list and help vote for those, because I'll be tending to concentrate on the ones that seem to be of the most interest to people. So that's the high-tech version. But we've obviously got the good old-tech version as well, so we do have two people with microphones. So if you do have a question, don't look to me. Look for somebody who's standing up with a microphone and flag them down, because I'll be looking for those people to see where the microphones are and the questions. You're also, of course, very strongly encouraged to tweet. So the hashtag for that is hashtag AKLConversations or hashtag AKHaveYourSay. Then there's an awful lot of after media, if you like, or the chance to revisit this. So all Auckland Conversation events are very well documented in AV terms, and you can go back and look at the proceedings for this evening, or indeed the vast menu of previous conversations on the Auckland Conversations website. And a full transcript and captioning of the event and presentations will also be available on the website, because, of course, the Council ensures that all this is available and inclusive and accessible to as many people as possible. I'd like to take a moment, if I can, to, and if I may, to set a little bit of context for tonight's discussions. As I've described and the Mayor's described, the consultations are now open for the 10-year plan, but then also for the 30-year plan. And so tonight we're considering the environmental input into that and the environmental work to be done in that. And there is the very particular focus on these two targeted rates. Just to recap very briefly on them, for the average house price in Auckland, the rate would be $1.30 a week, but that would generate over 10 years another $452 million, money that the council can't fund elsewhere, i.e. by more borrowing. So that would significantly fast forward that work on dealing with stormwater and bring that time frame back from 30 years to 10. So $500 million sounds a lot, but it's $1.30 a week for lots of people, makes that possible. The second one is the environmental initiative, and there's two options there. $21, did I say, yeah, sorry, I was saying, I said $1.30 a week. That's true for water. That's $66 a year. For the Environment Initiative, that's an extra $21 a year per household. Plan A would raise, or Option A would raise another $136 million on top of the base of $109 million. And that extra money, as Phil said, would go particularly for dealing with Kāori dieback, because there's a huge amount of science to work out on that yet, and also how we would then take that out into the field in terms of our practices out in the bush to make sure that works. But there's also a little bit of extra support in there for conservation community groups. And then there's option B, which would be $47 per household a year, and that would bring in an additional $311 million for those two programs. But Plan B adds more. So there would be a pest animal eradication project on Kauau Island and Waiheke Island, and a variety of pest control programs out on Great Barrier as well. And there would be some increase, not a big one, sadly, in our marine ecological survey and freshwater biosecurity programs. So I hope the message, don't worry about the detail of that. There's lots more of information about that at the back or indeed online. But I think the really important message here is that small sums of money raised collectively in some way actually adds up to a really useful amount of money in these two cases to deal with some very particular environmental issues. And so when we have the panelists up here, we'll be starting on that question of those targeted rates, but then of course moving far wider to discuss the whole ecological, environmental context for our region in these plans. Let me now just set a bit of context about that very much bigger picture. There are high hopes that we will have legislation and thus policy and climate commissions and the rest that will help steer us towards being net zero carbon as a nation by 2050. This is an extraordinary challenge for the rural community, of course, because 49% of those emissions currently are from their ruminant animals. But it's an equal challenge for us in urban communities, because we've got lots of work to do, not only on transport, which is a substantial part, ground transport, which is a substantial part of our greenhouse gas emissions, but also on energy use. We have pretty weak energy efficiency standards, for example, in our building codes. There's lots of work to do on how we heat buildings or how we generate heat for industrial processes. It goes on and on. And as I'm traveling around the country, because I spend a lot of time in the primary sector as well as in cities, the basic message I am always trying to convey is that we need each other. We can't possibly meet these great goals if we just say to the rural community, oh, we'll leave it all to you because there's not much we can do in cities. Or if they say, well, it's really hard to deal with these animals, and so we're going to leave it all to you in the cities. Neither works, because we're not going to meet these great goals unless we are supporting each other and encouraging each other across New Zealand, is the very simple message there. A very important report is going to be coming out in June from the Productivity Commission on pathways to on our transition to a low-carbon economy. And I just want to read for you, to you this very brief quote from the original issues paper on this subject that the Productivity Commission produced last June. And it's one that I think really encapsulates how big the challenge is. The shift from the old economy to a new low emissions economy will be profound and widespread, transforming land use, the energy systems, production methods and technology, regulatory frameworks and institutions, and here's the big one, and a business and political culture. That's the Productivity Commission saying this, and I wholeheartedly endorse that, because that's the enormous scale and importance of these big transitions. So what might that look like in an urban environment? And when we're looking at cities and how big and important of built environment it obviously is around the world, and how this huge migration to cities is continuing because that's where economic opportunity is, that's where you get a big network effect, so you get lots of innovation, lots of science, all those things. How might that look like? And the way I simply describe that to people is that we've really got to bring nature back into our cities, because we've got to make our cities largely self-sufficient for energy, food, and other resources. We've really got to get really serious about a circular economy whereby we reuse, recycle, and repurpose everything we do. So in bringing nature back into the cities in such a way, we would also be making them delightful and inspiring places to live and work. And I don't mean by bringing nature just planting a few more trees. This is about bringing natural systems back into our cities. So more stormwater treatment in wetland areas, for example, rather than pumping everything back to Mangere. And above all, that when we bring nature back into our cities in this way, that'll help us restore our relationship with and our appreciation of the ecosystem. Now, Auckland does have plans. For example, there's the Low Carbon Strategic Action Plan, first produced in 2014 and updated last year. And one of the goals there is to reduce Auckland's greenhouse gas emissions per person, per resident per year, from the current 7 tonnes a year to 3 tonnes by 2040. There's a number of problems with that goal, not the least of which is in 2040, 3 tonnes is still far too much if we're trying to get to net zero by 2050. But the real problem is that Copenhagen is already on 2.5 tonnes and plans to be carbon neutral by 2025. So that's what leading cities are doing around the world. Then we have to consider the Hauraki Gulf. It's not just a question of depleting fish stocks out there or the silting up of rivers and estuaries because of soil being washed out from paddocks. The Hauraki Gulf is really struggling. A fabulous piece of work has been done in recent years. This is Sea Change, which is a collaborative plan to deliver the world's first integrated marine and land spatial plan. But it's died a death because of the inability of the local councils around the Hauraki Gulf and central government to work out how to implement it. And yet Auckland is one of the most extraordinary cities in the world as we head towards a home for, say, 2 million people, because of its physical location on its 3 harbours, its 2 big ranges of bush, black sands on one side, white sands on the other, and all the great glories of our land, our water, our hinterland, and our biodiversity, but all are considerably under threat.